preparing to this meeting is being live streamed. And, oh, it recorded all that. Yay. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the first episode or show of Rainbow Table Talk. My co-host Lizzie and I are here this evening with our panelists, Dr. Christina Ivey and Rusty Rose. Let me tell you a little bit about our format. We are going to be an open roundtable discussion with the panelists, taking questions in the second half of the show from the audience, based on the mental health and societal issues facing the LGBTQI community today. So for the first show ever, we're going to deal with lesbian, queer women issues and what it's like to be a queer woman in society today, and our allies and how we face our everyday life. Rusty, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and you know where you're from and whatnot before, and then we'll go to you, Dr. Ivey.
Yes, I hail from Brooklyn, New York, and I live on Long Island, West Babylon, Long Island now. I am a pioneer, modern day LGBTQ pioneer, having been at the Stonewall riots in 1969, and not outside the club, but inside.
And we love and thank you for that very, very much, Rusty. Dr. Ivey.
Forgot, muted. Yeah, so I am Dr. Christina Ivey. I currently am in Boise, Idaho. I'm a professor in the communication department, and specifically my work is a variety of different intersections. My dissertation was over queer holy fools, so a lot of my stuff ends up being religion and gender sexuality. That is my gender sexuality is like my center. I grew up in the South in Texas, and so coming out was real difficult with a lot of different things. And then all my graduate work was in the Midwest, which honestly isn't much better. And then coming here, I'm in a nice liberal bubble in a very conservative state. So being queer has been a challenge. I've recently come out as poly too, which is now me being queer all over again. And so it's been a ride, but I'm excited to talk about things.
Lizzie, my beautiful co-host, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself too, and where you're from and what you want to get out of the show tonight?
Yes, and I'm so honored to be co-hosting this with Mod Jukes, and the word is right. I'm Elizabeth Sophia Strauss. I use she, her pronouns. I am a queer person and cis female and identify as a lesbian. I'm 30 years old and I'm born and bred New York. I grew up on Long Island, not far from Rusty, actually. And our goal for this platform is to really get to talk about the meat and potatoes of what it's like growing up and living as a queer person, and the challenges we faced and the work we need to do to keep this community safe, and you know, how we can do that and be activists and not be afraid to talk about the fact that we are proud of who we are, and that everyone is valued equally. We're no better than anyone else, but we obviously need to be valued equally. And I'm excited to see where this platform goes and grows. And I'm so honored that we have Rusty and Christina with us tonight, and everyone who's joined us on Zoom and Facebook, welcome. And we look forward to answering your questions. So just drop them in the chat, either on Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook, please drop them in the Facebook chat. And we look forward to the dialogue tonight. So thank you.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So Lizzie, I know you have a list of questions. I have some questions I want to ask too. Why don't you go ahead and get us started with a couple of questions for the panelists, and let's get this talk going.
Absolutely. I guess the first thing to talk about to launch our inaugural panel for both Dr. Christina and Rusty is When did you realize you were queer or gay? Who would like to go first?
I
Yeah,
don't
how
I
about,
don't mind going first. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
That's real difficult. So I actually have a piece on queer prudes, because I kind of relate, like playing softball, like one of the girls like refused to shave her arms. And I know this is going to sound weird, but I have a poem about it. But I don't know, for some reason that like simultaneously grossed me out. And also when I heard she did it because she was trying to go against gender standards, I like leaned into that and I didn't understand why. I always knew I was a little weird though. Like people would be talking about, or like people I hung out with would be talking about dating and stuff. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. And then, yeah, I got drunk with a friend of mine and we made out and I realized I was gay. That was not until college though. So I don't know. It's been kind of a weird journey for me. Like I mentioned about the religion stuff. And I think for me, that prevented me from seeing a lot of my queerness until much later. But I guess that was it. So early college, like high school.
Well, and that's awesome in that you found your way along the journey. And Rusty, what about you?
Well, to make a long story short, my mother and father had so many different friends, and one night we went to see Abby Lane and Xavier Cugat. And Abby Lane is a singer, and Xavier Cugat he was a conductor of a Latino band. And my father put me up on his shoulders, and there my eyes took one look at Abby Lane, and I was in love. I was 5 years old. And then he tells me the story that I thought she just like came over and pulled my cheek. I must have been frozen. I don't recall, but he says, no, she just didn't pull your cheek. She brought you on stage, and I must have been like paralyzed, looking at this gorgeous, voluptuous woman. And then in junior high, I remember bringing gals home and hiding them in my closet and things like that. And my mother would say, you alone? It's almost time, to go to sleep. And then there'd be a girl in my closet. Mom would search all over, but she didn't like search in the closet for her, but I knew early on.
Well, yeah, and that's sad though that we have to do that. We have to hide, who we're passionate about or
Mhm.
friends that are part of the community, because some people don't feel we're still not seen as equal. What about you, Ma Dukes? I'm curious.
Kind of funny. In 1972, my grandfather retired from the railroad. I was 6 years old. And, $75,000 in 1972, Rusty, you can attest to this, was a lot of money. It'd be like several $100,000 today. And so I remember my grandmother and some aunties and my mom and my two older cousins who were both girls. We all went shopping. And grandma and mommy put me in lacy dresses and tights and black patent leather shoes and all these things. We get home. That stuff sits in the pile in the corner. A couple of days later, my dad and my grandfather take me shopping. I come home with jeans and cowboy boots and flannel shirts and and they couldn't get me out of them. And I think I knew then. And then as I got older in middle school, I was definitely in love with my best friend. Her name was Susan. I'll leave the last names out of it, but it was like, yeah, guys just, I did date guys, and I was married for 10 years. I had 3 beautiful children, but I did that because that's what society had, expected of me. And that's what I thought I needed to do. Then I 29, 30 years old, and I said, I can't do this no more. I can't keep lying. I have beautiful redhead that I worked with, and I fell head over heels. I was like, nope, this is it. I'm done. No more men for me. I need to be true to who I am. And it took me a while to come to grips with who I was and be in my own skin comfortably, but it was the best thing I ever did for myself.
It's wonderful. I mean, for
How about
me,
you?
I've known since I was 3. I like girls. I didn't know necessarily what gay or lesbian or bisexual or queer was at 3, but I had a crush on a girl in nursery school, and her name was Chelsea. Couldn't tell you what her last name is at the moment or where she is in the world. But Chelsea from playgroup school, if you're watching, I'm single. So, but I've known since I was 3. I like girls, had my first crush, and then I think I tried to deny it for a long time because, we still feel other, sometimes it's scary. I remember in high school almost getting the nerve to come out to my mother, not because I didn't think she would be supportive. My parents are incredibly supportive, and I have a younger queer sibling, and we're very lucky that they value us equally. Just because you're revealing such a big personal part of yourself. And I remember being an intern at the Williamstown Theater Festival when I was 20, and there was this actress making eyes at me, and she grabbed me and she kissed me. And I remember Donna Summer's song "Could It Be Magic" was playing, and I just didn't hide it, and I just made out with her. And I really didn't publicly come out till I was 24, and I actually came out as bisexual or sexually fluid at the time. I think because I was clinging to the heteronormative, and it was never bad with men. It just wasn't as great with women. And then I fell in love for the first time with a woman when I was in my mid-20s, and when that was over several years later, I was so heartbroken that I realized just after, it took me almost 2 years, really 3, to move on from that, that I just am never gonna love, I don't think I'll love another gender the way I love that woman. Just realized and got comfortable with the word lesbian. And now at age, I was 27 by that time, and at age 30, I'm very proud of that label and how far I've come in my sexuality journey and how I continue to move forward. And, I always hope when I tell that story, and anyone here tells and shares their story, that makes anyone watching feel more comfortable to be who they are, because we shouldn't be afraid of who we are, and our sexuality and our gender is such a beautiful part of our life. And that's just what I hope for anyone that watches this, and or anyone not watching this but talks about their journeys and gender identity and sexuality. Yeah, so that's my very queer journey. And
I love it. So I'm going to jump in here. Dr. Ivey, you talked about, religion playing a big part in your coming out and your life journey. I have to say that it did for me too. When I came out at 30 years old, my mother was very supportive, but it was right about that same time that she found God and became born again. Now, I love my mother dearly, and in the beginning of our life and our, that relationship after me coming out, she was very supportive. She was in a very open, progressive, modern church. After a few years, that church split off, and my mother ended up in a very Southern Baptist traditional church. And throughout the rest of the years till now, our relationship has very much split. And we've become kind of different, distant. So how has religion affected you? I mean, I feel like, in some ways it's affected me negatively in my relationship with my mother. I follow the Red Road, the Native American spirituality. I really can't get into organized religion. So tell us your perspective on that.
Whew, that's a deep one. So for
I've been
me,
known to ask the hard questions.
I'm about it though. Let's do it. I mean, I'm the one that was like, oh, I study religion and gender. I asked for it essentially. So for me though, Southern Baptist, yes, like that. We were Keisters, which means we only went to church on Christmas and Easter. But I sort of, people, go off to college, and a lot of times people lose their faith in college. I actually found mine. Like I started going to a church and fell in love with it and was like, yes, Jesus, yes, all of this makes sense to me. And then it was right around that time, like I mentioned, that I started to realize I was queer as well. And so when I came out to my folks, they obviously were, my mom was like, okay at first. And then like a day later, she called me and she was like, are you sure? Because here's why. And then all of these things, my dad immediately was like, ah, you're going to hell, blah, blah, blah. But really like the folks that were the hardest were the new friends I had made in the church. Like I had one friend who, her name's Holly. Again, I won't go into like last names or anything like that, who like we had promised each other that we would be each other's bridesmaids. Like it was that kind of really, like I didn't have a crush on her. I'm also like sapio pan if we really want to get into like the levels of queerness. And so for me, she didn't fit into it, but like was dear friend. And when I came out as queer, she like just sent me this long message about going to hell and then left, like didn't correspond with me anymore. I had a lot of guilt and a lot of like things that I had to go through when I got into my first, so along the queer prude thing, like my partner, one of my current partners is the first person I ever kissed, first person I ever had sex with, all of that. So, and I found out I was gay with this partner. And they were very understanding about the whole thing and got me documentaries and books and things like that. Obviously, being in academia, I had to like dive headfirst into the like cognitive part of it. And yeah, it took all of that. My master's thesis was interviewing queer folks who had at one time been Christian or were still considered themselves Christian. My dissertation, like I said, was queer holy fool. So it talked about how a lot of times, first of all, queer folks are the most spiritual people that I have come across in all of my studies, like spiritual to the nth degree, and have always been historically. And what sucks about Christianity is the institution. The capital C church ruins it for a lot of queer folks. And so it's been quite a journey. There's obviously a lot of people who, but what's interesting is that not only the church coming in for people who identify as like queer and Christian or queer and religious, but then queer folks who are very secular also judge those people. And so for people who still consider themselves to be a faith, but also a queer, get hit on both sides. So it's been an interesting journey. Doing scholarship and being this person has been really hard because I have to like put on one hat, take off the other, and sometimes I can't do that, and it's really hard.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Rusty, being of an older generation, did religion play into your life at all as a queer person, as a lesbian woman?
My mother was the recording secretary of a Roman Catholic church in Brooklyn. And so my mother and father grappled with who I was. Like Dr. Christina said, yeah, guilt played a big part of it for me at first. I'm spiritual, and I had to, really sit with myself and think about it. I mean, this is organized religion. I mean, what would have God thought about this? And God embraces all of us. So, I'm comfortable with being Roman Catholic, and also I'm spiritual. I practice Buddhism, and I've even gone to temple. I just embrace all of it in my way. But I don't let organized religion dictate to me or box me in, and others shouldn't allow that. And like again, like the doctor said, at first you feel guilt, you this and that, but you have to sit with yourself and think about it. If God would not want all these religions to dictate who we should love, who we should be. I believe that God embraces all of us.
Well, if we're all made in their image, then every single one of us is an image of some part of God.
Yes.
Whatever that deity, that being is. He's called many he, she, they, they're called many things,
Right.
but it's, you know, all kind of the same entity, same, you know, in my opinion anyway. How about
Yes,
you,
and I
Lizzie,
feel,
as a Jewish woman, how has religious studies or religion itself affected you in your story and your coming out? I know we've had some private discussions about this, and your parents were pretty
Yeah.
supportive.
Being a Jew never halted me from coming out or identifying. I mean, yes, I'm not, so I grew up in a Reformed conservative Jewish home, not like an ultra Orthodox, which that part of the Jewish community traditionally is very against the LGBTQ community because of how they lead with tradition. But in my home, it was never a factor. In my temple, they valued everyone equally, which I'm very lucky. I grew up with that. And then, and I've always been proud of my Jewish culture and Jewish religion. And then when I came out at 24, was when I kind of had my awakening with Buddhism and why I identify as a Jew. So that actually helped me become more comfortable with myself. And, you know, I tell this to women and I don't hide it if I take them on dates or someone I'm interested in romantically, is that I of course want my children and my family, you know, humanism is important to me and I want them to see what else is out there. Yep, we're all human. And I do believe that God loves us all, like Rusty said. And but I do want my children raised in the Jewish faith with mixed, you know, with mixed spirituality of Buddhism, because that is important to me. Um, you know, but of course, if I did not end up with a Jewish woman and she wanted Christianity in our family, I would not be against my children being exposed to that. That is a part of their upbringing and their bloodline. And so, you know, I think religion is important to talk about, especially in the LGBT community. I wish it wasn't shunned, obviously, by many religions. It's heartbreaking. And, you know, one thing I do love is every year at New York City Pride, I do see a lot of chaplains. I see a lot of reverends and ministers out walking and being supportive. And I think there was a year that I don't remember what the church was, but there was a church in the West Village, and a couple of friends and I just had to use the bathroom, and they were kind enough to let us go in and use it. And they were actually having like a pride party, and we made donations, of course, as a thank you. But it was nice that they were valuing everyone equally, and they were a part of that. And it was really nice to see that. And I wish that that was everywhere, and we have a lot of work to do in order for that continue to happen. But I am lucky in the fact that how I was brought up in my shul, that it was never it did not halt me from you know, me eventually coming out. What really just halted me from waiting so long to live my life truthfully was I was just scared because I felt different, because it's not seen as you know, this normal still, which is terrible. But
I think we
maybe I
all
would have,
have felt that kind of fear.
yeah. I don't know anyone, at least in my generation, that didn't feel scared. I can't speak for the younger generations, because, you know, some of them have coming out parties and some people do come out at age 6, and that's great that they feel comfortable that young and supported to do that. But for me, it wasn't religion. It was just me scared of being different, which halted me for so long to not share my truths.
Took me a long time. It took me probably 47 years of my 55 on this earth to find a comfortable spiritual road. I have never been comfortable in church, in organized religion. I've been to Catholic churches, I've been to Baptist churches and so forth. When I found the Red Road and this Native American spirituality, not only did I find a way to believe in something bigger than myself, I also found some place where not only was I accepted for who I am, but in many Native American cultures, two-spirited people, like gays and lesbians, are revered. They're medicine people. In the Oglala Sioux, The two spirits name the babies when they're born. You know, in the Comanches, there's a organization called the Bordash. And what they were was they were the effeminate men who would be the gay men today, who were nurses. And they went out prior to a war party and set up a nursing camp and a home base so that when the warriors went out to battle another tribe, the Bordash Society took care of them, healed their wounds, bathed them in any way they needed taken care of. You know, in some societies, orphaned babies were raised by the two-spirited people. So, you know, not only, it was like, wow, I don't have to, not only do I not have to be shunned, people, you know, are respectful of who I am because I do walk in two worlds. You know, I've been married, I have children, I know what it is to be a woman, but I'm a guy. You know, when it comes down to it, you know, I'm a guy with boobs and you know, of a JJ, but I have a lot of things that I think about like a guy. You know, I don't know that I would ever want to be transgender, and I had a discussion about this with a friend today who asked me, you know, did I know when I was young, you know, did I want to be a boy? And it's not that I wanted to be a boy. I like being who I am, but that tomboy fit me more than that girly girl. And I just found a place where that tomboy was perfectly okay for me to be. I didn't have to be anything more or less than who I was. I came into the community. I worked in the kitchens at the powwows. I helped people, and I became an intricate part of the community around here in that way. And to know that, you know, there's places and communities like that, that's where it should be all the, like, we have value if you just let us be who we are. You know, we have just as much to add to any society. If you just let us be who we are, we can, and the best versions of ourselves come out. Oh my God, the work and the beauty that our community could do for this world.
And that actually leads me to another question I have.
Go for it.
And this for all three of you. Do you ever feel like I was bullied growing up by, you know, kids in school, and I always felt like it was because they could tell I was gay. But now you know, in my adult life, I don't feel bullied as much by people outside the LGBTQ community, but I feel very bullied by people within our community, which is hard, especially because I have been with men, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I have no shame in the fact that I have had sexual and romantic relationships with men, and there are still people, at least in my generation, you know, and I'm a millennial, and I get it a lot from the generation below me, Gen Z, that see it as a problem that I'm a lesbian who identifies as a tomboy and a dyke, and I use those words because I like those words. No one else has to use those words, but I feel confident in those words. And, you know, and that I've had relationships, sexual and romantic relationships with men in the past. And that, you know, even still, like, you know, I was talking to Ma Dukes about this the other day. There's still one man I'm still sexually attracted to, and it's Sting, like from the Police. But I still identify as a lesbian. So, you know, but there is nothing wrong with the fact that I think he's sexy. And if Sting ever wanted to be intimate with me, I have no problem with that. But I'm just saying, when people would say to me that, like, oh, that doesn't make you lesbian because you're still attracted to a man, well, I am who I am. And I'm not going to take shame in the fact that that person, you know, turns me on.
I think that, so one of the things I touch on in like the queer proof paper that I have is that I think, and I keep using the term queer purposefully because I try to use it as like an umbrella term for some of this stuff. Because for me, or what I have in the paper is like queer folks have a recognition, or at least should. I think there are moments where some are more rigid, but have a recognition that attraction is not as cookie cutter as the hetero people want us to think. Like I mentioned sapio, and like I actually identify as pansexual, well, sapio pan, which sapio has to do with like I'm really attracted to intelligence, like smart folks, and I'm kind of dimmy, which means that I have to have some sort of like romantic attraction with somebody before I can get it on, you know what I'm saying? And there's so many different facets to attraction that it's so I hate, especially when people in our own community start to draw boxes around what we have to be, when no, actually queer is embracing fluidity. Queer is about being understanding that for the most part I'm here, but occasionally, right, it's this. So I'm sorry that happens, because this is, that to me, that's antithetical to what this community is supposed to be.
And Rusty and Maud, if you wanna, you know,
Yeah.
just take that further.
Yeah, well, when I was bullied, not in Brooklyn, I was very embraced by my peers. But when I came out to Long Island, I was bullied in school because I talked funny and was ridiculed constantly, you know? Now, when so could you imagine if they knew I was also a lesbian, uh, but going back to coming out too, at the time when I came out, the definition in school, someone did say, because of, like Ma said, your mother put you in dresses, like my mom, and I preferred my father's shoes walking around, or jeans. Well, I somebody threw the word out, lesbian, and I remember going to a library or something and looking it up. So the definition of lesbian was not found in any dictionary, uh, and if you did find the definition homosexuality or homosexual in a dictionary, and I think it was Webster, it would say sexual pervert practice in a sexual perversion or something to that effect. And at the time too, transgender was not coined yet. Now trans friends were lumped in with transvestites, and but I've always felt like, even though they bullied me, I really didn't pay too much attention, to what they said. It was hurtful. It was hurtful, but I kind of strong in that way. And I became an activist, I guess that's also what helped strengthen me and it made me determined, to be who I am and everything. But there was a lot of, you couldn't really, like, if I don't like boxes, even like today, I think it's nice, kids are trying to redefine themselves. But even back then, I said, a lesbian, a this, a that, a heterosexual, or that, why do we have to be in a box? I always say sexuality is one continuum. I never feel it as just, being this, being that, being this. And Ma Duke said, sometimes she feels like she, and sometimes she feels like he, but I think because we're on a continuum. But, they did bully me again for my talking funny, because I come from Brooklyn, and someone, because I did dress, and I'll get into that about the way we dressed in the 60s and everything, threw out the word lesbian. And I went and looked it up and couldn't find it anywhere. But then when I did find, like I said, homosexuality, and then later on found lesbian, we were considered sexually perverted, according to the dictionary.
Yeah, and there's still quite a few people that have that belief, unfortunately.
Mm, yeah.
I mean, I was talking to the other day, I've read articles, a line in one of my poems is about gender chromosomal pairs. There's not just XXYY XY. You know, there's so many combinations that of chromosomal pairs, that extra pair that would align with being a transgendered person, or would align with, you know, these pansexual feelings, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. You know, people have such a, I think so many people walk around with blinders on, and they only look at what they can see in front of them. And they don't look at, you know, the bigger picture, the world around them. You know, in school, I was bullied for many, many things. I don't know that I could ever say that I was bullied for, you know, being gay, or being, I was just different than anybody else in class. So I got bullied a lot. And, you know, my first sexual assault happened in 6th grade. You know, so school for me was not an easy thing. And then I hit middle school, and like I said, I know for a fact I was, you know, looking back, I was head over heels in love with my best friend. We spent all of our time together, and she was just everything to me at the time. You know, and high school came, and new people and whatnot, but the bullying I see in the community, you know, again, like Rusty said about putting people in boxes, you know, just because you identify as a lesbian. Look, I'm as gay comes, right? I'm a dude. I like my women. I love boobs, man. Come on, it's just boobs, right? But there are men out there that are good looking. I may be gay, but I'm not blind. You know what I mean? I can appreciate an attractive, sexy man, and may even feel a little something in the nether regions when I see them. But that doesn't mean that I want to have a intimate, you know, long-lasting relationship with them. I'm human. I can appreciate beauty in all of its forms. You know, Sam Shepard, I think, is just, you know, him and that voice, you know, there's, you know, come on, like there's just so many specimens of handsome, attractive men.
Yeah.
You know, but that doesn't mean I want to sleep with them all.
Absolutely.
And you know, I can be attracted to women with not be wanting to sleep with them. But I
Absolutely.
hate
Like,
that. I'm sorry?
no, go ahead.
I hate that there's bullying and things like queer baiting within the community itself. We should be coming together and supporting each other, not tearing each other down or trying to put each other in boxes.
Yeah, I mean, what I was gonna say is like, what for me is like, when people use the term like platinum gay or gold star gay, I don't, I mean, I get like people are kind of joking when they say it, but it's not something I've ever appreciated, because to me it's like, oh, well, I'm better than you because I realized, you know, at this age that I didn't ever want to be intimate with a different gender, where it's like, well, I have no shame in the fact that I've been intimate with several different genders, and that helped me grow as a person and who I became today. And so the terms platinum gay or gold star gay, and you know, the terms like that, they kind of annoy me because it's putting other people down and saying that their journey, and whether it's their sexuality or their gender identity or both, is not valid when they use terms like that.
I've definitely used that term before to describe myself, but it wasn't intended to talk shit to other people. It was more like, I've had folks come up to me, like I talked about the queer prudeness and the fact that I've only been with like 2 people ever. And it was more of like a protection thing for me, because people assume that queer folks are also super promiscuous, and you know, because that must be such a focus of your identity, that's what you must do all the time. And I'm like, fucking no. Like I mean, trust, I do, like, you know, I like it, but also
Yeah.
I'm not promiscuous. And for folks that are in the queer community, cool, but that's the only time that I've used that term, is when like people have come to me. It's almost like the clause that you do back. But I haven't used that term in probably 6 months, because like I started being the scholar, I was like, what is this label doing for me? But what is also is it doing to other people? And I think that
and
that second part of that is what we forget sometimes in the community when we use outdated terms or terms that end up doing more harm than good.
yeah, absolutely. And there are obviously positive ways to use those terms. I just, at least coming from New York City, and at least on like the show Will and Grace, if you're familiar with it, the way they use it is not in a positive way. They're saying it like, I'm better than you because I've figured myself out faster than other people. That's just not, yeah. But I don't have, as long as people use it positively, like people say to me all the time, oh, isn't dyke a bad word? And I'm like, no, as long as you use it positively, I'm okay with people using it, or queer, as long as it's used positively. You know.
Well, I could jump in. I can tell you that dyke had negative connotations when I was growing up, and we reclaimed it. It took a long time, but we really did. And I think as far as they say that we're promiscuous, I think my generation takes the blame for that. We were the love the one you with generation. So if you want to, but like before the Stonewall Rebellion, meeting others, was not easy. And it was always clandestine. We met in bookstores and record stores, at potlucks and friends' homes. And the word would pass that we're going to get together or have a party. Okay. And just like the word dyke, we use subtle clues to identify ourselves. Well, dyke is what the heterosexual community called us, and faggot, and that when the cops busted into Stonewall, they called us faggots and things. But we had to identify each other with subtle clues. Earlier generations had their own ways, but in the 1960s and 70s, like if we had a right earring in our ear, it signified who we were. A pinky ring, a scarf hanging from our pocket, everything had meaning, even the colors of the scarf we wore. Remember that, Mom? I was going, like red is passionate, S&M, if you had a black and blue scarf hanging out, pink, I think, was passive femme. But a lot of us had that black scarf out of our right pocket, which means casual sex was okay. So in the 1960s, we were that kind of generation. And also our preference was also, you could tell by the type of shoes or boots we wore, flannel shirts or lacquer one, just to
Yeah, if I had to describe, I have an aunt who I haven't seen since I've been probably 10 or 11 years old. And, if you had to take that stereotypical picture of a lesbian in the 70s with the ducktail hair and the button down shirt and the cigarettes rolled up in your sleeve and the penny loafers, that was my aunt. And, for reasons of her own, she was a nurse, and she was in private home care. She moved away, and I've never seen her since. But like I see what I remember those clues and those things, learning from her growing up and seeing how she was, and even into the 80s, there was things like that, the way you wore your bandana at the skating rink, and the having the multiple piercings on one side or the other was a big clue, and things like that. So
I think in the 80s, I don't know when that, when we reclaimed it, but I thought it was somewhere in the mid 80s. If somebody said, like, let's say a heterosexual will come back at us and say, oh, there is a dyke, we'd say, yeah, I'm a dyke and I'm proud of it. And so we started to use the word, and give it a positive spin,
absolutely.
And that's what, and of course, that's what's going on in the Black and Brown community, reclaiming things and, putting positive spins on things, and, but yes, there were a lot of things they called us and everything.
absolutely.
This
And
was
worse.
even seen with like fingernail polish too. So like
Yes.
if this nail was done, that was actually initially started by lesbian femmes
Mhm.
and has only now been co-opted by the hetero folks. And it's interesting because like you all have been talking about like what you used to wear. Like I obviously femme presenting now, back in the day, I used to hate it because I didn't prescribe to like some of these things like that made you real girly and things. And I over the past year did like what I called the femme reclamation project, where I started researching femme stuff and started to get more in touch with my femme side. And so what I found, not only with the nail polish and stuff, but like our community has continued those signs, but it's some of people don't realize that the reason those signs were there in the first place had to do with safety. Like you had to be able to identify folks that were
Right.
of your ilk, right?
Exactly.
Without like outing yourself, because outing yourself meant a whole lot of bad shit. So now
Yeah.
like lesbians do like this little thing in their eyebrow that if you have like a nick in your eyebrow, apparently you're a lesbian. And there's little thing, I watch too much TikTok. But they're still there. It's just it's not the same. It's so that you can tell a queer woman from a straight woman.
Right. They like you said, they don't really, they're not aware of, where, what it evolved from, because, like you said, I mean, we couldn't be, we couldn't out ourselves. It would be dangerous. At the time when I came out, not only were you put in jail, but you lost your job, your picture would be plastered in the paper, and there was a lot of things going on. And those were the subtle ways we could find each other, identify with each other.
Lizzie, do you have another question?
Yeah. I guess while we're on this, it kind of goes into what we're talking about. And for its question is for the three of you, of course. Do you feel that there is a lot of virtue signaling from my generation or the generation below me within the community or about the community?
Could you repeat that, Elizabeth? I didn't hear a lot of what?
Virtue signaling, do you know what virtue signaling is? Yes. Do you feel like there's a lot of virtue signaling happening within the community or from my generation or the generation below? I think you're muted, Dr. Ivey.
Sorry. Yeah. It's hard though to right now to be somebody in a marginalized community and not to see virtue signaling, I think. So I don't know. We've gotten to a point where we sort of commend folks who like who can be the wokest almost. It's like a competition, so to speak. And so I think there's a lot of virtue signaling from folks who have to jump in and critique the thing. Like queer scholar, queer activist, of course I'm going to continually seek to like, because I even preparing for this, I was like, who do they want to see tonight? Do they want to see Dr. Ivey the poet, or do they want to see Dr. Ivey the scholar? Because my initial thing was like, oh, there's two white women on a panel talking about queer women in today's society. So I need to make sure to say something about the fact that this isn't a complete picture, because we don't have, and then I was like,
and somebody brought that up in the chat, excuse me for
Yep.
interrupting, and I
No,
do
no.
kind of, I agree. Part of it was scheduling. We
Yeah.
did have some other members that were going to come that were
Yeah.
not able to come. And that will play a part in some of it, but I do agree that I would like a more wider representation.
But I think it's perfectly fine to have a night that is this, honestly. And especially with the two hosts that we have, that this is who they are. Like it's perfectly fine to have that, to feature, and especially if this is something that you see going on to succeed, like it's perfectly fine that you have a night that is this, you have a night
Because
that's
I want to put spotlights on different topics, because I'd like to have a night where it's all people of color from the
Right.
LGBT community.
Exactly.
Because there's a whole nother set of shit that they got to deal with that I, as a white lesbian, do not have
Yep.
to deal with.
And
Oh,
I
yeah,
guess
absolutely.
that's what I was getting to, is like, I think that it's very quick for any marginalized community, but queer, because that's where we're talking, to jump in and to virtue signal and to say, well, this, and this. But there has to be a balance, right? We have to continue to critique while also coming back and being like, fuck yeah, or, I don't know if I can say that on here because you're recording it, but heck yes, I'm glad this thing is here. I hope it is successful. Let's keep pushing it forward. How about we try these things, right? That's how it has to go, or else you're going to shut down any like sort of progress or anything good that's coming out of this sort of thing.
Yeah. And we can curse on this platform, so go for it. But I guess
Yeah,
I
we're
mean
all
more like,
adults.
yeah, I mean, yeah, as long as everyone's 18 and over. But I guess what I mean is like there's activism. We do have to talk about who we are, and representation matters. I just mean more like I don't like when people say woke, because to me the people that preach the wokeness, like they're never really doing anything but just posting meme after meme after meme. I'm like, what are you doing besides sitting on your Instagram all day? That's not actually. I mean, listen, there's one thing if we're all quarantining and we're doing the best we can virtually. That's one thing. But in times that we're not facing COVID, and even so we're getting vaccines and we're trying to return to normal as fast as possible. There's ways to actually have conversations, and sometimes they're going to be uncomfortable conversations, but that's how we make progress. And so I just feel like, at least from my generation, it's not always, it doesn't really feel like progress. It just feels like, look at me, I can say things. And it doesn't make me feel good.
That's a very interesting point.
Yeah. And Rusty, what's your opinion on it?
Well, I don't like the grandstanding like that. This virtual signaling, whatever, grandstanding, everything.
Yeah, grandstanding. Yeah.
Grandstanding to me. But like we all, and the far, the extremism of everything. We're all struggling, every one of us, and we should struggle together. No one is better than anyone else, and we're not going to solve anything by, oh, I'm better than you. It's overboard. Everything is overboard, it's and of course it's true what you say, Elizabeth, that that we have to be aware in order to take, we have to take a step in the right direction, but to put down some other person or an opinion, I mean, that's why we have opinions, so we could in an educated manner talk to each other. Just because my opinion is different than you don't mean I shut you down,
Yeah.
but it's complex. The whole thing is complex.
And I think that's the word you just used, that gender and sexuality is complex, and it's okay. It's complex because we're evolving every day. We're not going to have complete answers every day because we're not complete people.
That's right.
Things just, and that's the beauty of being a person. So, Madix, did you have a question?
I want to continue. Every single person, every single two-legged being that stands on two legs and talks and walks and eats and shits has two things in common. We come into this world bloody and screaming, and we all go out of this world alone. You may have a dozen people surrounding your bed, but your last dying breaths and your last dying thoughts are your own. Every moment in between those two things should be about making this world a little bit better than the way it was when you were brought into it. I go back to my Native American spirituality. The goal is to eventually make every step of your life not with a prayer, but as a prayer. You know what I mean? You're living and walking and talking a breathing, loving prayer for your fellow man, your fellow woman, the world, and nature around you. You become part of it. And I feel like Christina said, we're all in a competition to be the most woke. The hell with being woke, just be human. Let's just be human beings and compassionate human beings to each other. I think somewhere along the line, we've lost our compassion. And sorry, Rusty, what'd you say? I see
Oh,
your
no,
lips moving.
I'm agreeing with you. This is what it is, you know, we have, it seems like people have lost their compassion, and it needs to be, I don't know, it needs to be, I don't know, it's just, it is, it's just too much, you know, the way everything is going, you know, and yeah, we need more compassion. We need to recognize each other's differences. We all, like you said, are here for a short time. Why not embrace each other? Why do we have to fight each other and say, I'm better than you, or my opinion is what counts? And if, I mean, it's to the extreme now where if someone don't agree with you, they'll pick up a bat or weapon and beat you over the head. I mean, there's no educated way of speaking anymore. No, you know, years ago, in my day, you'd watch two newscasters debate on television, and they could be at each other's throat. Then you could see another picture of them later on in that afternoon. They're on the golf course laughing and sharing a meal. Today, you can't do that. It's like it's everything is taken too literal. You know, you need to a breather there. You need some space. You know.
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely agree. So now, if it's all right with you guys, I would like to move into some more questions from not only Lizzie and I, but the audience. Ron had a really interesting question. Ron, can you want to come off mute, honey, and ask your question to the panelists?
Oh my God, you're putting me on the spot here. Thank you so much, Marty. And thank you for this important discussion. Rusty Rose, so glad to see you. You know, it's so interesting to hear, you know, so interesting to hear different perspectives from different, you know, generations. But I was wondering, and actually, let me make sure I ask the right question. Yeah, because sometimes have noted, you know, I was born in a communist Eastern Europe country, and we just didn't know about, you know, there are other types of sexual orientations. I didn't even know about different genders back then. I mean, that it took me a few decades to, you know, to find that out. But when there is, I always find when people are like, you know, ooh, you know, that's not good or whatever, they may not know about it. Like they haven't exposed themselves yet. You know, like for example, like, you know, when I came to New York City, I didn't look for German people to live in a German neighborhood. No, I lived, you know, wherever the rent was, you know, cheap and I could afford to live. And that happened to be in a very diverse community. And that's how I got more understanding and more acceptable of other ethnicities, sexual orientations, you know, transgender people, you know, everything. So do you forgive, you know, people, and, you know, like, you know, are you willing to, like, okay, come on, I'll teach you, come with me, you know, to a meeting, you know, like come to the Rainbow Table Talk and we'll, you know, expose you in a friendly way, you know, and you know, is it okay that if they, you know, as long as they're willing to learn, you know, and to understand, you know, or do you like, oh, they should know better, how come they don't understand that there are different, you know, differently thinking, you know, people in the world? Like how, what do you feel about that? I'm sorry.
Ron, I agree with you. You know, you don't know where a person has come from, and there's always room at the table to talk, you know, and you know, like I said, everyone, I don't shun anyone for being different. I try to, you know, speak with them, and it's true. They emulate the only thing that they know in their environment, and I do blame a lot of the media for fueling a lot of fires and putting us at each other's throats, you know, because that's years ago when you were a journalist, your job was just to report the news and not take sides, you know. But yes, there's always room. There's always a room to teach, you know.
I think if I can go next, something that you typed in the chat with your question was you used the word straight, and I like that you used the word straight because I personally don't use the word, it's just me personally. I don't personally use the word straight to describe heterosexuality because I feel I'm straight in many ways. So I don't use it for sexuality. If I'm talking, I will just say heterosexual or heteronorm. Or I don't even like heteronormative because that's saying normal, but heterosexual for people who identify that way or are born that way. You know, and
Yeah, Elizabeth, that also is a generational thing. And, that's how in my generation described, oh yeah, he's straight, she's
oh
straight,
yeah,
because we were still like you all are with he, she, they, trying to define ourselves. It's part of the defining process,
oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
so that's where Ron is talking about, I guess, tolerance and
And like I said, I don't have a problem if other people use that word, and language is evolving every day. We're evolving every day. We're learning more. I just don't personally use it because I feel straight in a lot of ways. I don't personally use it to talk about sexuality. But I, for me personally, I didn't even know what pansexuality was till my mid-20s, and someone told me they were pansexual. I just asked calmly. I said, "What is pansexuality?" And they told me what it was, and they didn't have a problem with it because I wasn't disrespectful and I wasn't negative. I just was inquiring information, and that's important. People, I didn't know what demisexuality was till several years ago, but it's important we learn these terms and how people identify in their journeys. And even people I work with in real estate ask me questions about pronouns. They ask me questions, and I will happily have a calm conversation. I will never yell at anyone because that doesn't get you anywhere. A calm conversation. And usually, like, there's someone in my office who he had a hard time understanding the they pronoun because they met someone who is non-binary. And I said, that's how they identify. And they were like, well, but their sex word. I said it has nothing to do with their sex organs if their brain is telling them. And I said, your brain is gender and your sex parts are what we are assigned at birth. And and that helped him understand it, my colleague. And it's just trying, I just said before, you're having what can be it wasn't an uncomfortable conversation for me, but it might be for some people. And you have to be patient because of how people are brought up. Not everyone is brought up in progressive communities. Not everyone is brought up with the media, and like the media can be great and the media can be very toxic. And I try to be as patient as possible because I know everyone is different, and if we don't give people that patience, we're never going to go anywhere. So for me, like I said, I don't use straight to identify sexuality, but I don't have a problem if other people do. But I have had people tell me they think it's wrong that I don't do that, and I say it's not wrong. It's just something I personally don't do, and I tell them to mind their own business because they do, and that's fine. It's just every single person on the planet is different. Everyone is on their own journey in so many things, and so we have to be patient. Otherwise, we can't we can't live together. It becomes anarchy and destructive.
And I think my answer would be just a little different because I grew up in a very not accepting area of the world. Because I think patience certainly, and the scholar side of me is we all grew up in systems that are heteronormative, in many ways homophobic, racist, America especially, racist, all these things that undergird, and people grow up in those systems not having an alternative, and so they don't know better. And so there are certainly aspects of me that are very patient and tolerant with people. However, there are some people that no matter how patient you are with them, no matter how many times you try to hold their hand and try to talk them through, they can't get over some things. And maybe it's just I'm getting older. Maybe it's just because the teacher aspect of me is well, if you don't want to learn, why should I try to teach you more? And so there's a line for me that if I have tried to show you things, I and you don't want to try, no. and I think for me it's because so much of this that I'm trying to teach folks or that I try to help folks with is my identity is how I live, is who I am as a person. And so if you can sit there and you can tell me you don't agree with this, you don't believe in this, blah, 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 when somebody who identifies this way is talking to you and telling you their truth, their experience, what happened, and you're saying, I don't believe it, then I'm sorry, fuck you. Goodbye. I cool. You can live your life in ignorant darkness. I tried. And as long as I can say that, and for the most part, I am very patient. It's definitely growing thinner as I get older, unfortunately. But if I've tried, if folks around you have tried and you still are resistant, I'm done. And I know that's
There
probably a
comes a
shitty
point
way to
where you
be.
can't waste your energy anymore. You
Oh
have better
yeah, I
Exactly.
mean
put your
the
energy
bigots
into.
you can't waste your energy on. The
I
bigots
have
are just yeah.
I have too much energy trying to live my life in a society that in so many ways tells me that I'm not worth living. So I can't expend more trying to tell people who are trying to tell me that I'm going to hell or I'm this or I'm that I deserve to be here.
Yeah, and
If I'm standing, that part you said earlier about, if this person of this gender is telling you about these things and you're still looking at me in my face saying, I mean, there's a line to a Lacey Root poem. There are 1,500 species that practice homosexual behaviors. Homophobia is only in one. I mean, and God damn, come on. Like, can't we just, as stupid and corny as it sounds, can't we all just get along? Like, really?
yeah. I
You
mean, at the end of the
know?
day, you can't waste your breath on the bigots. It's not healthy, for in any way. And like an example is my grandmother who just passed on was very progressive woman, was very accepting and valued all her grandchildren equally. When I came out to her, she said, I love you for who you are and I will love whoever you love. And my grandmother with, my younger sibling uses he, she, they pronouns. My grandmother would say she, because CJ was okay with my grandmother using that for them. The reason my grandmother couldn't use them was not because they didn't accept CJ, they loved CJ and who they were. It was a grammar thing for her. We just never fought her on it. We tried to explain, but she said it's not grammatically correct. And like, if that is someone's preferred pronoun, that's what we respect, obviously, today. And my grandmother was, 85 years old, different generation. But for her, it was a grammar thing. And so for some people, it could be that, not saying that's correct. I'm just saying there are some people who see it as that. So there are many reasons people have a hard time grasping certain things,
Yeah. And I guess for those folks, like I try to explain that language changes and try to bring up things like even from then that's like, hey, this is different. I don't know. And so like I hesitate for the last thing, it's like I just give up easily. No, because I would then go in with, well, language changes, right? And that this is a grammar issue versus a human being identity issue, right? And so, but I know sometimes you can't say that. And so yeah, the whole thing is messy and complicated. Like this is a great question because it's like asking all of us, how much are we willing to bend our backs in order to help? And it's why Bell Hooks even said that, Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde and really a lot of Black women writers say things like it's not up to the marginalized to teach the center about themselves, and yet we have to do it. So it's a great question.
Absolutely. Anybody else in the chat have a question? Glenn, Jenny, Brandy, anyone? If not, Lizzie, I know you have a whole list. I got some more. Robert, how about you? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a comment. I'm a gay man. I'm also gender non-conforming, so I'm a little bit trans. Uh, when I come to this panel and this forum tonight, I don't see myself, and that's a problem for me. I also don't see diversity in the GLBT community tonight. And the other challenge I see is that both of the hosts are the same gender. Um, I stayed tonight because I want your event to be successful, and I support the word is right. I hope that you're able to rethink about what you want to do to encourage diversity. And when people come from the GLBT community, they can see themselves. Um, the last thing is, I like it when the advertising for an event is direct and honest. On the Facebook page, it said it was a GLBT forum, and when I get here, I think it's an L forum. So for me, that's misrepresentation. So I prefer that the advertising is direct. So
Well,
Well, I
that's my
apologize that you feel you were misdirected or misled in any way by the flyer that we put up. Um, One, scheduling had a lot to do with the forum tonight and who was here. You are welcome to come back and be on a panel of, we're a night where we talk about gay men's and transgender men's issues and things that deal with your part of the community. I'm not trying to be, Lizzie and I are not trying to be secular in any way. I want to deal with different issues on each show will be devoted to a different portion of our community and different issues. We're going to have shows that deal with, have all spectrums, so to speak, and deal with things like queer baiting and other issues that happen within the community. We're going to have shows with people of color. We're going to have shows with men's panelists dealing with, because gay men have your own sets of health and mental health issues and societal issues. And I want to put a spotlight on those for a whole show, just like we're putting a spotlight on female lesbian issues tonight. Another one will be on people of color within the community because they have their own sets of issues. I want to highlight issues for each show. Because if we go too broad with every show, then we have a lot of it gets too watered down and specifics aren't talked about. I want to definitely highlight different issues with each show. But thank you for your opinion. Thank you for your input. And we'll it definitely is the first show, and we're working out bugs, and I do appreciate the input. So thank you for that, Robert.
And Robert, I just want to say, Ma Dukes and I don't identify as the same gender. We do identify in our sexual identity as the same, but there are plenty of gay men watching on Facebook and here on Zoom tonight. There were earlier. If they had to drop out, that's, they might have had a different engagement. But it's of course okay to spotlight, gay and queer women, which is the L in the, the community. And we're going to, of course, have many different diverse panelists who are part of the community. Some of it did have to do with scheduling, as Ma Duke said, but I'm very proud to have Rusty and Dr. Ivey with us tonight, in that we've had a beautiful discussion in the last, hour and change about, in different generations. We're all from different generations, about how we've grown up and how we live as queer people and gay women. But yes, not everyone here identifies as the same gender. At least Ma Dukes and I don't identify as the same gender.
And I want to say, add to that we would not be here having this conversation if it weren't for women like Rusty and the people that were at Stonewall and stood the hell up and said, we're people too, and we deserve equal rights.
And Yes, and if I could cut Ma off, Robert, I thought I saw you at poetry or Boston or something. Hello, hello. Hi, darling. Behind me is a picture that, well, I'm 100 years ago. That's me, and holding my hand right there, that's Sylvia. There's Sylvia Rivera. As far as the trans community, listen, I'm right there, right here. My friend died recently. This is Stonewall Pioneer with me. This is Christina Hayworth who died. And then we got Stormy, and we could go on and on. And is there anything you'd like to ask? I mean, I feel bad you felt not included.
Well, I'm mostly hope that the event is successful. And I'll share that I'm a long-term civil rights activist in the gay community starting in the 1990s.
Yay.
And I
Thank you.
led several civil rights actions, and we always had diversity in leadership of the committees and in the press. And I've always had a great sensitivity for that. And I'm trying to share that with you tonight, that to have more diversity in the hosts would be consistent with that.
Well,
So,
how is there not diversity between the four of us? I'm just curious. I mean, yes, we are all white, but we're all very different.
well, when I look at the two hosts tonight, I see women. So
Okay,
I see the
I'm just gonna
L.
say this. I'm gonna say this one more time, please. Maude Dukes and I do not identify as the same gender, and we've said that for over an hour, and it's disrespectful to mislabel someone. But Ma, if you want to if you can identify your gender, please.
I'm she some days and I'm they some days. Depends on how I feel. Yes, okay. Yes, technically we are both female assigned vaginal parts. Okay. I'm a butch lesbian. My gender is very, very male oriented. Lizzie is not. Christina is on a different part of the spectrum. Rusty is on a different part of the spectrum. I understand what you're saying. Maybe, you would feel more comfortable if we had a third host that was a man, a gay man, or a transgendered man, or that there was some testosterone in some way represented in the hosting staff. I get it. This was something that was my dream, to open up a space for our community to have shows, discussions. I don't even like to call it a show, to have open discussions about issues that affect us. Again, I want to highlight different types of shows, different issues for each episode, each show, so to speak. So I apologize that you don't feel represented tonight. Lizzie and I will definitely take this information and your opinion going forward, and use it to better the platform and give it the diverse look that you're looking for. But Lizzie and I are the hosts. We're the ones that came up with the show. You know what I mean? So, we will have guest hosts and guest panelists every week, every time we have the show, twice a month. But it just happened to be the women tonight that were able to join the show to do that. So thank you everyone for, being here and participating.
Yeah. Robert, could you say that again? Because I'm very interested in the last activist project that you had done. That's wonderful.
Yes.
That's absolutely wonderful. I'm the early dinosaur age, the Stonewall riots. What were you doing? Because I do know I've paneled with you or talked to you, or did you read poetry too?
I am a writer also.
Yes.
For the second largest GLBT social action in the United States, was led by the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. It was called Equality Begins at Home. And there was a different action on every state capital in the United States. And I was one of the leads for the District of Columbia.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is absolutely, wow, wow.
Yes, thank you
That's
very much.
fabulous. Because I know I've seen you before, or, you know, I don't know if I was in your presence or I don't know. Somehow I know I crossed your path. I'm getting too old to remember anything, but yes, I do. And thank you for continuing the fight. You know, thank you for continuing. You know, we started it, you're continuing it. Everything is evolving, thank goodness. You know, and there's still a lot to do, a lot of work to be done, you know.
I think activism comes in many forms. You know, this, in my opinion, is a form of activism because it is giving people of a marginalized community a place to openly discuss themselves and the issues that face us. So I definitely think, yes, education, any kind of education is activism. Poetry is activism. Some of my most requested and loved poems are very much activism. When I talk about growing up and wanting and needing to be seen, that's giving a voice to some 14-year-old kid like my granddaughter who's going through the same things. And so I appreciate activism on every level, whether it's writing a poem like Lacey Root does. She has 3 books, you know, about these subjects, or it's someone like Robert or Rusty going out and marching and putting their faces and their bodies on the line in some ways, you know, because I know for a fact that Rusty has, I guarantee Rusty has faced violence just because of who she is in the 60s and 70s. You
And
know,
still
I have,
do. And the death
yes,
threats still continue.
you know, so yeah, any activism is good activism. So I thank you all for being here and for sharing your voices and for listening and learning. I think we're off to a great start for the very first show so far. Lizzie, we got another question for us, hon? What do you got going on?
Yeah, I absolutely have another question. What you know, for Ma Dukes and our 2 guests tonight, what some people believe there's a stigma that, you know, lesbians and queer people are born with mental health problems, and I've heard people within the community say that, and it's awful because I do have anxiety, but I don't have that from being a lesbian. My life got better when I came out. So I was just curious what your opinions are that, you know, people within the community or people who aren't a part of the community, and that they can be cruel. They think that some mental health comes from gender identity, and I understand gender dysphoria is a part of that, but I mean just like their sexuality is a part of that, I guess.
I know of what you're speaking about. My opinion on that is this: any mental health issues that I have that have derived from my sexuality or my gender or who the hell I am have come from other people's opinions, thoughts, words, and actions towards me and who I am. They didn't come because I am who I am, but they came because, you know, if we're human, we care about what other people think about us to a point, you know, I'm sorry, I'm 55 years old. And yes, I still want my mommy's approval. I know that I may not ever get it for who I am, but that doesn't stop me from wanting it. But that didn't me being gay isn't what caused my anxiety and my mental health to, and my depression. It's because my, folks in my family, my friends, whoever, they're not accepting. Modern day society wants to call me, a scourge and whatever else. The mental health issues, I don't think, come from being gay or transgender or bisexual or whatever you are. It comes from the societal pressures of being that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And Rusty and Christina, do you have
I mean, it's hard to top what Ma just said because that's basically it.
yeah, no,
It's
yeah, absolutely.
it's hard to come out unscathed when you're told you are not normal, you don't belong. And I'm interested to see this younger generation who have been able to be themselves sooner in more formative years. I'm interested to see how mental illness plays. But I think one of the things we're kind of coming to terms with as society rolls on is like everybody has shit because of like the way that, again, systems work. The direct connection obviously comes from a historic thing where if you were homosexual, queer in any form or fashion, it was seen as a mental illness and you were institutionalized. That stigma is going to continue to hang on then until probably for a long time. I think what we can do though is sort of utilize that stigma in the way that we've reclaimed words like dyke and things like that. I think we can reclaim mental wellness instead of mental illness and be like, yo, you're queer, which probably means you have this list of things. Go see a therapist, get on some medication, take care of yourself mentally as well as physically. And I think that's something our community can do is utilize that stigma to push people towards helping themselves in that regard.
Absolutely.
And I actually, I wear many hats. I was a psychiatric nurse for many years as well. And like Dr. Christina said about, mental illness and patients, people being committed. In my day, if you were found out, your parents could 2PC you, put you in a mental institution. And of course, you undergo shock treatment and all kinds of conversion therapy, all that. But it was even in spite of Stonewall happening, or Stonewall was the beginning of the modern day activism to try to change things. But it wasn't until I think it was 1973 that the psychiatric manuals threw away, that we were mentally ill. That's when it changed. I think it was about 70 something, but I know there was a lot of people where I worked. There's a video of me put out by Newsday or something where I'm talking about it. And I remember some guy being in there 30 years because he was gay. And then there were others who were transgender, thrown in there and couldn't cope. And I revealed to them that I was a lesbian. At the time, we didn't have gender fluid and they and this and that, which my pronouns also changed over the years. And I worked with them, continuously until they were able to go into society again. But you had no positive reinforcement within the at the time called mental institutions. There was nothing to support them to say you're okay. I know I've had a strong constitution, because once I read that term, being homosexual was a perversion, this and that, I said, gee, you don't feel perverted, you don't feel sick. I said, so I've never let it affect me that way. I've always stayed true to myself and who I felt I was. But a lot of people do struggle with it. And today, our trans community struggle the most with it because they still, in society, although it is getting a bit better, but society, shuns them, and there's a lot of work to be done. But yes, years ago, you were locked away for being homosexual. And I think it was, if we could look it up, is it called, Christina, what is it, DSM? That, I think it was 73, where finally they lifted that, we weren't ill, but a lot of our community suffers from depression and bipolar, a lot of is in our trans community. Yes, they're least
Yep.
accepted. And it wasn't to, and I want to tell Robert, with Robert's efforts and my efforts, we're trying to change the face of things. But Robert, many years, there was, people wondered, were the trans community visible at Stonewall? And I had heard so much going on, and I have been one of the invisible Stonewallers. And I felt that it was time that, I come back out there, even in spite of the death threats, come out and stand up, and just before I go to set the record. And so I wrote a poem called Put the Tea First. And once I did that, a lot of the trans community were able to feel so proud of themselves and get that strength and embrace who they were. And it's really to put the tea first. It's like a rally cry across the whole nation and different countries. I'm asked every day if they could perform that poem. But I'm very much, and yes, the transgender community, because of my poem, putting it in perspective, they are now celebrated as being part of the Stonewall Rebellion. Along with, I tell people that the heterosexual community was there too. A lot of people don't know that. They think it was just a gay event,
I think we've had allies throughout time, but they've had to be
Yes.
in their own way as secretive as our community has had to
Sure.
be, because if they were, you're the friend of a gay person, that must make you as sick as them, kind of stigma. So I just can't thank you guys enough for the efforts that you've put forth on our behalf.
Yeah, truly,
Yeah.
truly.
And when I see people like Robert, who's voiced his opinion here, and then who's carrying the torch, keeping it alive. Yes. One day we'll get to walk together. I don't even want to tell you what the revisionists did at the 50th in New York City to the Stonewall Pioneers. It was supposed to be our celebration. But yeah, one day, for 49 years, we led the way. And on the 50th, the Stonewall Veterans Association, my friend Sylvia Rivera, Stormy DeLava, Marsha Johnson, lifetime members, even beyond, we were not honored. And there's so much going on with that. But yeah, every time I hear like people like Robert and younger people, and they're carrying the torch and they're furthering the cause, I'm so proud of each and every one. And I'm glad that I was a small part of history to make that possible too,
And I want to just kind of tag on to what something Rusty said about, our allies and heterosexual friends and people, because I see this a lot with my generation and the generation below me and a little above. They'll post things like, I won't apologize for being heterosexual, or if someone tells them they're heterosexual, they say, I'm sorry. And I say, I feel like that's its own form of discrimination, because there's nothing wrong, of course, with being heterosexual. You're born a certain way, just like we're born a certain way. And I feel I don't engage or fight with them when I see that, mostly on social media, because it's not worth my mental health. And I don't personally think I'm actually going to get through to those people, to be honest. But sadly, but I very much admire our allies. We can't do it alone, and I I mean, I don't know how the three of you feel about that, but I get rather annoyed because some of the most important people in my life are heterosexual people that I can't get through with. I can't get through day to day without. I mean, my therapist is heterosexual, and I love my therapist.
I
It
think
just,
people, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, Dr. Gay.
Oh, I think people that do that, whether it be again for queerness or for race, I won't apologize for being straight, I won't apologize for being white, they're just co-opting a narrative that they've seen work for us. Only it really works for us because we're actually oppressed. They're not oppressed for being straight. They're not oppressed for being white. They're, men who are misogynists are not oppressed for being men. And it's just co-opting a narrative, trying to play a victim. I'm really coming out as the bitch on the panel, and I'm sorry.
No, you're not. I don't think
No,
that
you're not.
at all.
I
I think
appreciate your honesty and your bluntness.
I don't think you're
Absolutely.
that at all. I think it's very intelligent what you're saying, and I wish that my generation, the younger queer generation, understood that all, saying that is its own form of discrimination, and that we can't pick on each other like that and bully each other like that. And we have to, like, I don't, it upsets me when I see that, and I don't engage with them in the social media or in person because it's just not worth my time.
Look, let's be real here, okay? And you want to talk about being the bitch of the panel, I may get it after this comment. The only group of people in this country that is not discriminated against are white straight males. The rest of us are some sort of marginalized community. Women of color. Now we got it twice. Gay women of color, gay men of color, gay men, Black men, Mexican men. The only group that is not oppressed are white, cis, straight males. And unfortunately, that is who is the majority of who is in charge of what happens to the frickin' rest of us. You know what I mean? The equal representation in our government isn't quite where we need it to be for our community or any community that is marginalized, whether that's people of color, that's women of color, whoever the hell it is. Let's get real. That it comes down to that, and until we can all say, hey, look, we're all going out in a 6-foot box. Let's try to be as kind and compassionate to each other as we can be while we're here. I mean, my sister has a saying where she's like, I am not a human on a spiritual experience. I'm a spirit on a human experience. We're all spirits when we come into this world. And then we have this human flesh bag and we live this life, but we're going to become spirit again when we leave this life.
I think that's a beautiful way of.
I'm sorry?
No, I was just saying, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it.
I, for one, want to be a spirit that has lived a life of kindness and compassion for my fellow human being.
A very beautiful way of saying.
Yes,
that.
Robert, it says you raised your hand. What's up?
Yeah, I wanted to share one strength which for mental health, which we think we have in the GLBT community. I grew up in a family where there was a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, and I have attended adult children of alcoholics for the last 20 years. A lot of people talk about shame in those meetings, but I've been able to share what I've learned about pride, and I've learned a lot about that by participating in pride marches and events in June. And I think that's a unique strength that GLDP people have, which a lot of other people don't have. That's
I would
it.
agree with that.
It's an affirmation of who we are and a celebration, but it will always be, and just know that it is a civil rights march first and always will be. And could you say that about you attended meetings for the alcoholic and drug related kids? You were working with them, did you say, Robert?
No, I attended meetings for myself, recovering from growing up in a family which had drug and alcohol. It's called Adult Children of Alcoholics.
Yes, and I've been to meetings too with what is that called? Is it Al-Anon? Is it? Yeah, so I'm with you there. But yes, the only thing I don't like about what's happening with the Pride marches now is that corporations have taken over, and we're losing a little of who we are. You know, in the 50th anniversary too, we were supposed to take our place, and in our place was a fleet of cars by a German car maker. Different, and I said, "What are you doing here? This is supposed to be for Stonewall pioneers," but that's another story too. But that's the only sad thing about it. But and what's happening is it's corporations first, organizations and activists like Robin and myself last.
Yeah, it is very much frustrating seeing the amount of capitalism from especially during Pride, and not being like, I don't feel seen. I feel like, I feel like other in those moments. It's, it's hard. It's very hard. And I always remember it is a civil rights march. It's nice that we can safely celebrate, but it
Yes.
always be first and foremost a civil rights march, not just a big party.
Well, you hit on something in our discussion earlier, Lizzie. I feel with a lot of the generation that's between 14 and 24 right now,
Probably more like 35, but
well, that they're coming out and they're expressing their gayness, their queerness, to be part of the cool kids club, because
Yeah.
it's the cool thing to do now, to go against society and proclaim that, oh my God, I'm queer, I'm this, I'm that, without really understanding what they're proclaiming themselves to be. They're 14 and experimenting and yeah, right. I wish it had been cool to be queer.
yeah, we did talk about that earlier in our production meeting. I think it's more like 14 to 35, if I'm being honest, because I see people my age do it.
Does anybody else on the panel feel that they've run into a lot of that?
I feel like especially in the Broadway community, it happens.
I've run into a different situation, which I have to say, the millennial generation and the younger one, that you just mentioned. I don't know what they're called, Generation Y.
Gen Z.
Gen Z. Okay. Well, I found out that they have embraced those of us who are at Stonewall. They want to know who I am. It has been the millennial and the generation coming up behind them that have said, who is this? You mean this person is still alive? What? And they have resurrected me. I have come, into the forefront because of this young generation. They want to know that. I find they want to know their history. That's what I'm finding. They want to know
absolutely.
who I am and what was Stonewall and what was this and they're very inquisitive and really want to know and want to celebrate us while we're here. But they're also at the same time being fed a lot of malarkey, a lot of baloney by revisionists and by the cancel culture LGBTQ plus, there's something I don't even know how to even say it, but maybe Robert would know. They want to just honor certain people or pioneers while forgetting about the others. And I think it has a lot to do with also corporate marketing or something. But going back to Marduke's question, I find what she said just opposite, that the millennial generation and Generation Z want to know who I am, what I did. Why isn't there more people celebrating about who and what I am? And I can tell you this, that when I close my eyes, I've left my legacy, the control of my legacy, to not only my daughter and friends, but to the transgender community, which have been my strongest supporters. Yes, so hopefully that's what's going to
The
happen.
rainbow heart, Rusty.
I love the rainbow heart. That's wonderful.
I find
But yeah, I
different
think that
stuff with
they
my
do.
students.
But don't you remember being young that we walked? Well, I couldn't do it because I'd be probably murdered on the street. But you feel your oats when you're young, and you feel invincible. I think that's what it is. Part of their being young. If only we could bottle that. Like I could drink it now to feel that way. But
If only.
they're trying to figure out who they are, but like I say, we're not out of the woods, and we should still, watch behind us still, and they're a little bit lax in that, but they are. I have to say thank you to them. Thank you to the millennials, and thank you to the generation. Elizabeth, you said Z, Generation Z, for wanting to know who I am while I'm still here.
I think
That's
this is
awesome.
why I mentioned that like education is activism, because I think for many of them, we still don't have proper queer education in schools. Like people don't want to talk about pride. People don't want to talk about the fact that Bayard Rustin was just as influential as MLK or Malcolm X and was very queer. But MLK, who was actually kind of homophobic, I blame the church, was pushing him back and pushing forward other agendas, right, simultaneously. And so we don't hear about that though. Like I heard about that in some class at like in queer studies in graduate school, right? And so it took me getting that far to learn anything about that. What I find with my students is that a lot of folks, because they're able to do this, they see it as cool, whatever, they gravitate towards it. But they don't know the history, which can be dangerous because like Rusty said, we have to continuously look behind us. The way that we do that is by knowing that we have to look behind us, and that's where the education comes in. And so I found that they're open to learning about things, but it's one of those things, it's like knowing where to look until school. I'm not saying that schools have to teach everything about it, but like some of this history stuff that gets neglected because of it being queer and taboo and what have you, is a problem, because so many folks who are seeing that they can do this identity and express it don't really know exactly what it is that they're doing sometimes.
Absolutely, I agree.
I agree with it as well. Yeah, it's just I'm speaking from a New York City standpoint, obviously, because that's where I've grown up and I live. It's just I feel like sometimes it feels wrong sometimes what I see. And I don't feel valued equally when I see it a lot. I can't speak for a lot of other parts of the country and world, obviously, but it just, at least where I live, it doesn't always. Sometimes New York City pride, it's just very overwhelming, and I sometimes tend to want to leave early. And when I look at Stonewall, I see it as an important landmark, and I think about people like Rusty and Sylvia and everyone who fought for me to be able to stand there safely. And I think about other people who were killed that I'm the reason I get to stand there safely, and it makes me sad. And then I see people standing there and they're kind of taking inappropriate selfies or doing things that are not appropriate in my opinion, that it makes me want to leave. So if that's just how I feel sometimes at New York City Pride.
Unfortunately, I think the general population knows the names of more of the martyrs and the people that died in our community, like a Matthew Shepard or a Tina Brandon, or, the names go on, than they do the truth and the history about where those people came from or where our history started. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah. I don't know how you feel about that, Rusty, as a New Yorker, but currently. The New York City Pride, I mean.
Well, I don't even, I have to, it could be a long conversation. I am agitated by what has become of Pride run by Heritage of Pride. Like I said, during the 50th anniversary, they disrespected the Stonewall Veterans Association. Behind me is my friend Sylvia, and I'm here with our hands, we're holding. They disrespected us and did not have us lead the way. For 49 years, we've led that. It's really to celebrate what we've done at Stonewall. And it should be right after the Stonewall Pioneers, should be every organization, even today, even Robert, everybody who's an activist should be celebrated and follow behind us as we're walking. But and how do I feel? I feel insulted. I feel insulted that we were disrespected. And while this was going on, instead of, they even disrespected my friend, the attorney, Hal Weiner, and his group for the Gay Activist Alliance. Instead, they focused on the GLF, the Gay Liberation Front, because some of them said that they were walking by Stonewall that night and that they were there. And it's just this whole political thing going. And just, Robert, so you know, I was slated to do my poetry at the rally, put the tea first to celebrate the trans community. And they asked me to send them. Now, by the way, I had a contract. Yes, and the only way you could get out of it is if we had a bombing or, some kind of terror attack. And I sent it to them. Next thing I knew, I was pulled from the rally. But
Bless you.
At probably they figured I was going to riot again or something. I don't know. But while this was going on, the disrespect at the 50th, the New York City Police Department, the Police Benevolent Association, and filmmakers were making Inside Stonewall, which is a documentary. It is going to air soon. I'm part of it. It is going to tell you who was actually at Stonewall. They've uncovered a lot of stuff. It is also, Inside Stonewall is a documentary featuring the riot police. And I could only say that during the filming, they brought me to a location and, because everybody claims they were at Stonewall. I've actually had said it's a thorn in my side because, but they brought me to a location and said, in my words, sure, well, see if you're at Stonewall. So the cop who grabbed me, I look so different, but I grew my hair long again to at least have my hair look like I did. And I walk in and I was worried, oh my God, I look this way, that way. How are you going to recognize me 50 years after? I walk in and he said, there's Rusty. And I went, but this is going to come out and I can't wait for it to come out. And when it does, except for the people I like, the word is right, Ma Duke, Elizabeth, and everyone who have sat with me and heard my story, there'll be no more interviews. There'll be no more interviews with me after that and all that. But anyway, yeah, there's a whole thing going on. It's a can of worms. I don't even want to get into it, but I'm very dissatisfied with the treatment of Stonewall pioneers and the course that the Pride March / parade has taken. And the people who attend, they're not aware that there's some kind of struggle. I think it's power struggle going on behind the scene. I don't even fully understand it, but
Yeah, no, I understand, and I understand how you feel, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And
yeah.
I'm very honored you have been a part of our panel tonight, and I'm so honored to call you a friend, and that I've gotten to hang out with you in person. And it really means a lot to me to know that you are a part of my life and my journey. So you know that.
And you too. I had so much fun and embraced. I mean, there's a whole poetry community out there, and everyone, and it's amazing. It's just amazing how everyone. I find the poetry group is less judgmental, and everyone is love each other, and it's peace and love, and no one feels they're better than each other, and it's just I wish everybody during this pandemic and after are like so much like the poetry community.
It really is
Everyone
beautiful.
everyone shares, and that's why I thought I knew Robert from the I don't know why the poetry. You must have read a piece, either a prose, maybe. You must have read
He came on
prose.
my platform. I think you met him
He
when he
did.
came on Deadpan. He's been on Deadpan Dope before, so
Ah,
that's how you've met him.
so Robert was there the first night that we.
He was there for the inaugural, and many people
Okay,
here,
that's why.
and I'm
Yeah.
very happy everyone. And Robert, did you have another question?
I wanted to share just a long-term hope for our community, which is in the average school book for children in the United States, for there to be maybe three people who are featured who are queer. And my recommendation would be that they would not be artists or performers, but they would be working people like Turing, who was a scientist, or Tammy Baldwin, who was one of the first, I think she's either the first congresswoman or senator who was a woman, and of course, one of the leaders from Stonewall. And my view of the current community in the United States is that it's very conservative. And to get that into the school books now would be as hard as getting sex education in the school books.
Well, no, you're not wrong there. You're definitely not
You're
wrong there.
right. Oh my God, you're right.
And we are going to have more panelists that are not just from the artist and poetry community. It'll be certainly diverse, and because obviously queer
Yes.
people do many different things. Not everyone writes poetry and is an artist, but that's where we're starting, of course.
Absolutely. Dr. Ivey, Miss Christina, yes, would you please come back and be a panelist for that show? The anti-capitalist queer show.
Absolutely. I'll also probably pull my partner into it, or one of my partners, Dr. Amy Ariano, who y'all may have seen in other poetry stuff. Their work is in queerness too, to a small degree, but it's a lot of trauma work as well. And they also do a lot of work in poetry, or not poetry, prison system, teaching, debate, things like that. Very much non-binary. Like, we've had a sweet discussion about they were like, maybe if I had been born during a different time, maybe I would have been trans, but for right now I'm doing with it what I can, and so have recently changed their pronouns and stuff. I'm really excited. So I'll definitely forward their name to you as well, and their contact info. But yeah, we want to talk about anti-capitalism too. I'm And I don't mind being the bitch on any of your panels. This is
Okay.
I don't consider you that, by the way. I just think of you as a very
Hey,
intelligent
look,
person.
bitch is, in my opinion, a
I
compliment.
love it. I love it.
Broad and total
Okay.
control of herself. You know, there's lots
Be
of
sure,
acronyms.
be sure on that panel to have at least one capitalist.
Absolutely.
Boo. No, I'm just
Robert,
kidding.
we would like you to come back for one of our panels with the gay men and the transgender folks, because we feel that your opinion is important as well.
I would be happy to do that, and I could also be the capitalist.
All right.
I mean, I am also a capitalist, and not within how people, put the LGBT community on blast during Pride, but I am a real estate agent, so that does make me a capitalist in some ways.
That makes you a
But-
person trying to survive.
It also makes me a person trying to survive, but I don't appreciate, like, when I walk past an H&M or, the banks that have all that stuff up, and it's like, well, I don't, great, but I don't feel represented. I feel like a prop. So
I don't feel you're capitalist in that way. You may be if you call yourself capitalist, but you're not going to shut Stonewall Pioneers on their birthday, the anniversary of Stonewall.
no,
I
I
don't think you
welcome
would. I don't think you would go for that. If you
No,
were
I
on that,
welcome.
if you were on that committee, you wouldn't go for that.
No. I welcome everyone who, like you and all the pioneers, because I get to walk safely because of people like you. I don't forget that, and I've written essays and monologues dedicated to those pioneers because we have to continue to talk about it and have to continue to talk about it with the people who are still around, or we're never gonna learn. And it's very important to me, the history of the community. That's the only way we evolve.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up for our first show. I think it was a great success for the first time through. We've learned some things. Rusty, Christina, thank you very much for coming and sharing your experiences with us. I appreciate everybody that came and viewed and asked questions. And we'll be back in 2 weeks, right, Lizzie?
Yep, every second and fourth Sunday of the month we'll have new panelists and new topics, and we're just going to keep growing. And it's been a pleasure talking with you and Rusty and Christina and all our guests.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great weekend and a beautiful week ahead. And thank you for joining The Word is Right.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks.